Welcome to What's the Truth? We are joined today by Dr. Jeff Myers, a good friend of mine from 20 plus years ago. Dr. Myers, thank you so much for being with us today. You and I first met in Tennessee when I was in college, but a lot has happened between then and now. Can you introduce yourself briefly to the audience and specifically share what your role with Summit Ministries is?
I'm happy to. Dr. Stephen Chambers, it's great to be with you on your show. I'm so proud
We'll
of
still
you.
stick to Stephen for me, but you are Dr. Myers to me.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you on your show. I'm so grateful for all the work that you do and what you're doing to equip people with truth, especially young adults. And that's the heart of what we do at Summit Ministries. We equip and support the rising generation to embrace God's truth and to champion a biblical worldview. And we do that in two main ways. One is through curriculum courses, like the ones you have there with homeschool students coming in. The other one is through in-person programs. They're 12 days long. We hold them in different places around the United States, but mainly in Manitou Springs, Colorado, which is the little hippie town that is right at the foot of Pikes Peak. It's a beautiful place to go for 2 weeks, and students come 16 to 22 years of age. They interact with the top Christian thought leaders of our day, people like John Stonestreet from the Colson Center, Frank Turek, who authored the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, Dr. Christopher Yuan, who speaks about holy sexuality, Dr. Kathy Cook, who is an educational psychologist, helps students identify the ways that God made them smart. And throughout the 2 weeks, students move from wondering whether a biblical worldview could actually be true to 95% of them saying, I believe this. I believe this. And then they stay strong for years. We study them even 10 years after they've been through the program, and 90% say, yep, I'm still living strong in a biblical worldview. So it's one of those kinds of things that God uses in really a miraculous way to turn the hearts of a generation toward him.
Help me out with some of the statistics. I think I've read or heard that only about 4 or 5% of young people have a biblical worldview. Is that about what you're hearing now?
Yes, that figure comes from the social researcher George Barna. And at various times, he said that as little as 1% of the rising generation, Gen Z, has a biblical worldview. Those would be the young adults who are they're in college now, maybe late high school into their 20s. And it's the generation that is least biblically literate, possibly in American history, but certainly for the last 100 years or so.
But when people come to Summit Ministries in Colorado, I've heard that statistic of that biblical worldview goes up astronomically, like almost to 85-90%. Is that correct from what your studies have shown?
That's right. Yeah, by the time they finish the program, it's 95% say they embrace a biblical worldview. So it's a complete change in their perspective.
And we hear a lot about people having a biblical worldview, and then they go off to college or they get into the workforce, and that number drops dramatically. What did you say your studies are showing 10 years out after they graduate from the program you lead?
10 years out, well, it differs for a little bit from year to year, but it's gotten stronger over time, which kind of goes against what you would think the trends would be. But when we first started studying, we looked at we would just reach out to our graduates a year after they had gone through Summit. And then we would reach out to the ones who had been out for 5 years, the ones who had been out for 10 years. And the 10-year graduates, about 85%, they were still strong in a biblical worldview. And now it's about 90%. So it's actually increasing, which is something we're pleased with, but also a little bit baffled by, because you always sort of assume, the world is terrible and it's just getting worse, and so people are just going to become less and less faithful to Christ through time. What if it's actually possible that it might not be that way? And I think there have been a lot of pastors like you who've said, if that is actually happening, if God can do a miracle like that in the life of a young person, would I not move heaven and earth to make that
Mhm.
experience possible for every young person that I know and love? And I think that's
Absolutely.
the right question. And I don't think it's it is miraculous. We believe it's a miracle when a hard heart becomes soft, when a mind that is confused becomes clear. But it's straightforward what we do. We just introduce students to a biblical worldview. Start with scripture. That what God says in his word is not only the basis of a way of thinking about the world, how to be a better Christian, it is actually reality itself.
Mhm.
You're opening up reality itself. And the second thing is helping students understand the counterfeit worldviews that are vying for their attention so they're not caught off guard by them. And the third thing is equipping them with the skills they need to dialogue, because you can always be more confident about things you're willing to talk about with people who might not agree with you.
So well said. So well said. I'm not sure what would be more enjoyable, being at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains in Manitou Springs or sitting under the teaching of some of those people you mentioned. I mean, what an incredible opportunity. What a beautiful place. How did Summit start there? Is that where you guys have met and been a part of this for a number of years?
Yes, Summit Ministries began in 1962. Before I was born, David Noble started the program, and it's got a unique origin story. He had been a student at Hope College in Holland, Michigan, and had heard a speaker speak against communism. And, you remember from history class, the Cold War, and everybody was concerned about the global rise of communism. And and he heard the speaker and then went up and asked, hey, can you tell me more about this? And ultimately ended up leading a study group at his college about communism versus a Christian worldview. And as he studied, he read the collected works of Marx and Lenin, which I don't think any other college student in all of history has ever done. It's like 20 some volumes. But he read that, and he said he realized the Marxists have a plan. They have a plan. They have a plan to take over seminaries and get people to think about social justice and then stop believing in the divinity of Christ. They have a plan to take over philosophy and then the ethics programs and then science programs, psychology, sociology, politics, law, economics, history, in every single area. And his question was, do Christians, first of all, know we're in a battle? And
Mm.
second of all, what would we say? How do we respond? Because these people say that what they're doing is scientific. They have written volumes and volumes about this. Is there such a thing as the Christian worldview? And how would we know what it was? And how can we teach it to other people? And that really became the origin of the ministry. This global threat led David Noble and his colleagues to ask, what is a Christian worldview? And then they began to pull together all the sources of people, from C.S. Lewis to Carl F.H. Henry, who had been thinking about this kind of a thing. And then I had the privilege of, when I graduated from high school, to attend that program. And it had an extraordinary influence on my life, not just my belief in Jesus, but my understanding of how everything else in the world works.
And so this opportunity is for young adults to come to Colorado. But if I remember correctly, when I was in that age group, I attended something similar to this in near Chattanooga, Tennessee. Is that opportunity still available for people perhaps that live in the Southeast?
It is, yes. This summer we will have similar meetings to the ones in Colorado, the same speakers, the same staff in Anderson, South Carolina, at Anderson University. It's
Okay.
a beautiful campus, beautiful dorm rooms, great food, great program, a lot of Southern hospitality, and students will have the same kind of a program there, and it will have the same effect on their lives, God willing, that the programs in Colorado do. And it's an easy drive for most people in the South.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for what you do with Summit Ministries and the impact you've had personally on my life, as well as the impact you have on countless other young men and women all across the world. Your influence has spread, and I'm so appreciative for how the Lord has used you, Dr. Myers. Thank you very much.
It is an honor to be a teacher in a time like this. And I know you would echo this. I used to say to my classes when I was a college professor, I've made it a certain way up the ladder of life. And now my goal, grab you, pull you up to where I am, and then push you on ahead of where I can go. And that's the heart of a teacher. So when I hear that people have been influenced by this program, it's very humbling and gratifying. I want my students to be able to accomplish 10 times or 100 times what I was ever able to do, and to do it in places that I would never be able to go.
Well said. Well, let's talk about the book that you recently published, Truth Changes Everything: How People of Faith Can Transform the World in Times of Crisis. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, Stephen, it was actually a personal crisis in my own life that inspired me to write the book. I had gotten a book contract. I wanted to write about how Christians made a difference in the course of history. And as I was preparing to write the book, I received a diagnosis of cancer. And that's a personal crisis. And what's going to happen? Are you going to survive? When I was growing up, if someone got cancer, they died.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of in my mind. And I began to ask the question that anybody in a crisis situation would ask: what's most important? If you think you might not live, every phone call you make is different, because you might not get a chance to talk to that person again. Every book you write then would be different. What is the book I would write if it's the last thing I get to write? And this book, Truth Changes Everything, came out of that. I realized if this is the last thing I ever get to write, what I want to say is that Jesus is the truth. And when you're thinking about Jesus, but you're also from the perspective of Jesus thinking about everything else, that not only changes your life personally, it quite literally changes the course of history.
So true. And that's actually what the book is about. You compile together stories and illustrations and really bring that to light throughout history. To be quite honest, the style of writing is just amazing. It grabs the reader's attention and just draws you in. Where did you learn about all these stories? I guess it was just from conversations and books you've read over your life. Is that correct?
Yeah, a lot of it is in that way kind of a history book, just trying to bring to life the lives and the work of people who were faithful Jesus followers, who were not perfect people. Some of them were kind of cranky. They had a hard time getting along with other people. Some of them, had to overcome great personal difficulties in order to make a difference. And I think over time, I had just kind of collected those stories from my own reading. And then some of them just started to do a little bit deeper research in things that historians haven't really talked about that much. One of the fun stories is I did a show with Eric Metaxas. He's the guy who wrote that book on Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He also wrote a book on Martin Luther. I've always thought of Eric as an accomplished historian. And when we were doing the show together, there were a couple of stories I told, and he said, I have never heard that story before. And I was thinking, yes, I have a history fact that Eric Metaxas himself is not aware of. But it was, some of it was just looking back, how do shaping events change us? Yeah. And I maybe we'll get to talk about the Black Death a little bit, but
yeah, I want to talk about some of these stories. Before we do, though, let's put our academic school hat on for a moment and talk about truth. There are people today, and perhaps this has been the case for centuries or millennia, but there are people, I think, that are asking the question: can truth even be known? I think generally speaking, everybody or most people would agree there is truth or some form of truth out there, but can it really be known? And if so, how would we know it if we even saw it? What do you think? Can truth be known? And if so, how would we know it?
Well, I think you're right. A lot of people are confused about this. I mean, half of Americans believe that truth is up to the individual.
Hmm.
And in even
And
among
that would be like you be you, those types of phrases.
it is like that.
You do
Yeah.
your own truth.
Yeah, yeah. And you hear people say this. It's just sort of a way of talking, speak your truth, man, and
Hmm.
that's kind of the way people think about it. But they do tend to believe that truth is up to each person. In other words, you're not speaking the truth, you're speaking your truth.
Hmm.
And in a way, there's nothing, it's not that harmful to say to someone who's struggling to get their viewpoint out, hey, man, speak your truth, right? That's just a way, but it's a way of talking and it's using the word incorrectly. The idea of truth, if you go back to scripture, one of the key references I'd like to go back to is John 8:31 and 32, where Jesus says, if you follow my teachings, you will be my disciples and you will know the truth. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. That Greek word, which is in the manuscripts that we've used to translate into English that we read today, aletheia, it's a word that doesn't just mean your truth, it means reality itself. Jesus is not just saying, if you follow my teachings, then you'll be able to be better at your own teachings. He's not just saying, if you follow my teachings, then you'll be able to speak your truth or you'll live a better life. He's saying, if you follow my teachings, reality itself will open up to you. And
Hmm.
that, Stephen, may be the central conflict people have today. Do I even want to live in
Hmm.
reality? Because maybe my fantasy about the way I want the world to be is what's actually real for me, and that makes me feel better. But the biblical perspective all along has been hard or easy. It's most important to live in reality, not to try to create some kind of a fantasy world.
Hmm.
Mentally healthy people live in the reality of what actually is so, even if some aspects about it are difficult.
Hmm. Hmm. You said at some point in your book that truth is hard to find, not because it's hiding, but because we're looking for it in the wrong places. Unpack what you mean by this statement.
Well, I think it's hard because in school and maybe just through life, maybe through social media, we pick up the idea that, well, for example, truth is what helps me win. People think
Hmm.
about, oh, well, if I'm right, if I can just get more people to believe what I'm saying, or make them feel ashamed for believing something different, then therefore I'm right. That's called sophism.
Hmm.
Others believe, well, each person has their own truth. That truth is relative to the person. So you'll hear people say things like, "Well, that may be true for you, but that's not true for me." Or people will say, "Truth is whatever works." One of my professors in my graduate school would always say, "You can't really know truth until it hits you in the face." In other words, if
Hmm.
you run up against something that just isn't part of reality, it'll hurt you. And then you will know what the truth is.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
truth isn't true, really. It's not really discoverable. It's just made true by events. So people take on all of these different aspects of the way they think about truth. And so and it doesn't matter. I guess that's a
Hmm.
big question, because it should be possible to come to an agreement about a lot of things without having to fight about whether ultimate truth, capital T, exists.
Hmm.
I'm in a hotel room right now. I'm looking out onto a highway, and I've noticed every single car is driving on the right hand side, going both direction. No matter which direction, they're doing it that way. Is that
Hmm.
absolute truth? No, in England, it would be the other way around. The cars would be reversed, but they have to agree that that's the way to do it. Otherwise, you have
Yeah.
chaos. Is there something more to it, though, than that just agreement?
And keep going there because I think you're you're tapping into something that's so important that we understand. Agreement about what is true protects against chaos, but when it comes to the ultimate truth, certainly people don't agree, but what is the result? I mean, it is chaos in our hearts individually and in relationships and society as a whole, correct?
Correct. So let's take an issue that's very much in the media right now, which is the issue of sex trafficking. Is it wrong for a man who is in a position of power to sexually take advantage of a young girl? Is it wrong because the young girl doesn't like it? Is it wrong because it's a power imbalance? Or is it wrong because human beings bear God's image and therefore have an inherent dignity? And it is wrong, eternally wrong, for one person to abuse another person in that way. If you end up with any view short of the idea that there is absolute truth, then there's always going to be a circumstance in which, oh, well, in this case, it might be okay, right? So, well, yes, it would be wrong in the United States because it violates the law. But if you're in a different country that doesn't have laws like that or can't enforce those laws, then there it's right. No, it is an issue of right or wrong that is true across cultures at all times in history and applies to everybody. That's what we mean by an absolute truth.
Well said. Well said. Dr. Myers, we're going to take a break and come right back to diving into the book. And I want to specifically look at some of the stories. But this has been an amazing and an insightful conversation to this point. Thank you so much for your wisdom, and thank you for the book. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us to What's the Truth. We hope that you like or subscribe to this podcast and share it with your friends.